Oh, I'm sorry. That's hard.
Oh, well.
Does anyone have any fun plans for Thanksgiving?
We're not supposed to.
You can still have fun.
Got canceled.
We're going camping.
That's good.
That is fun.
Where?
I don't know yet. Somewhere not raining.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good luck with that, right?
Yeah.
Set up your tent in your living room.
So we'll give it a couple more minutes for folks. I do know that we're going to have one commissioner, Commissioner Slavor, that will not be here tonight. Otherwise, I think we might just be waiting for one more person, maybe a couple more. But Zach, if you'd like, I can go ahead and get started reading our normal start of the meeting script for folks, if that is helpful.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome to the November Sustainability Commission meeting. As I normally do, I'm going to read through my prompt to help orient us to this particular platform. So for those of you who are joining us via computer, device, or phone, I just want to remind you, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you are a panelist, commissioners, or staff, we ask that you mute yourself. If you're not speaking, you do have the capability to mute and unmute yourself, as well as your video. We understand some folks are going to have some technological issues or reasons to have their cameras off tonight. So just want to let you know, if you have unstable internet, feel free to turn your camera off, but we do encourage you to keep your camera on as much as possible. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting, if you haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand so that you may join the speaker's queue. There are a couple of different ways of doing that. For those of you who are viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, if you click on participants, you can click once on the blue hand icon. If you're listening in via phone, you can press *9 and that will raise your hand on our end. I will lower hands as speakers are called upon. When the public comment period begins, Chair Mulholland will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it's your turn to speak, Zach will announce your name and I will unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak, after which I will again mute your microphone. I just want to remind folks about the chat and Q&A functionality of Zoom. There is no chat function or Q&A function for our attendees. And so commissioners, we ask that you please not use the chat functionality as our attendees won't be able to see that chat in progress. If you do have questions about technology, feel free to use that and I'm happy to answer that during the meeting. Lastly, in accordance with House Bill 4212, this meeting is being recorded. Recordings will be posted to the Sustainability Commission's website after each meeting for 30 days, after which, if you would like a recording, you can contact me directly for that. I'm happy to provide you. So thank you again so much for being here and your flexibility as we maintain our long distance meeting routine here now. I will turn it over to Zach.
Thanks so much, Samantha. To get us started off here, do the normal startup actions. First would be to review and approve the agenda. Does anybody have any suggested changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Seeing Julia as a first, do we have a second? Doug? All in favor of approving the agenda, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
I had ayes for everyone. Any nays? And any abstentions? Okay. Seeing none, passes. Next up would be to approve the agenda, the meeting minutes from October. Did anybody have any concerns about the minutes from last month? Seeing none, do we have a motion and a second?
I move to approve the meetings from last month.
I second.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and Karen, you're in favor?
Sorry. Yes, I was raising my hand through the participant thing. You want me to do that?
That works. Thank
Okay.
you.
Zach, you're still muted.
And any opposed? And any abstaining? Okay. I had all of the commissioners present voting yes. Okay. Next up, we have public comment and commissioner response to public comment, and then we will do elections and move on to our presentations.
So
Samantha, do we
first
have
up,
any?
yep, looks like we have one speaker, Jim New, and I will allow you to speak now. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? You can. Okay, great. Thank you. City Councilor Semple, commissioners and staff. First of all, congratulate Councilor Semple on your reappointment. On July 7th of 2014, I'm sorry, on July 14th of 2020, the Sustainability Commission sent a letter to the members of the City Council with 8 community recommendations for immediate policy development with a review within 12 months. One recommendation was for no new natural gas in new city buildings as actions to limit gas infrastructure, time possibly as part of the franchise agreement or other mechanisms. As I reported to the commission last month, new infrastructure being installed in the downtown riverfront development consists of new natural Northwest gas distribution lines. On December 9th, a CAP 2.0 update will be presented to City Council at a work session. I hope there will be updates on the Sustainability Commissioner's recommendations, such as no new gas infrastructure, fossil fuel infrastructure ban on tanks and terminals, fossil fuel risk bonds, and EV charging at gas stations. These actions should be a priority on staff and council's list. A reprioritization of community recommendation actions by city staff would circumvent the Sustainability Commission's efforts of the last year. Please stay focused on reducing the major emitters of carbon in the community in order to reach the goals of the CRO and align with the CAP 2.0 plan. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Samantha, can you have the next person speak, please?
And that was it.
Well, lovely. Does anybody have any comments on the public comment that came in?
I do. Thank you, Jim, for your comments. And I was wondering if maybe Councilor Semple, if you had any updates about natural gas going into the riverfront development, if there's any that
the riverfront is already decided. So part of having the developers be willing to do it, that infrastructure is going in.
Any follow-ups, Laura, or
just if you have anything else to update on, like, are there any? My understanding was that it wasn't decided if they're going to the building. So is there still places where the city
Well,
can't?
you're right. They're putting the infrastructure into the street. We haven't approved, and gotten to the we're going to go ahead and build with the buildings. I know that they want to have it, and they can make it happen if they get the okay, since the infrastructure will be there. But the riverfront project isn't going lickety split right now because of all the other things we're dealing with. So you're right. They did want to do that, but I at least don't remember that was got the go ahead yet. The negotiations for the franchise fee are confidential. Everything that was we talked about at the last meeting, I think in September, is still, that's pretty much what it is. So there's tinkering and fine tuning, but I think the franchise isn't going to be the main path towards carbon reduction from gas. So I know that's disappointing. It hasn't come to council yet. It's still in negotiations. I'm on the sub team. But even if I was allowed to tell you things, I really wouldn't have much to say. And I'm sorry about that. I know it's not what we want, but there's a lot of people in the decision making. And it's important to keep our voices going, you know, even when it's not going the way we want it to.
Thanks, Emily. I guess I'll comment. Just to say, Jim, I think this is a issue it's of concern to me. It's something that a few years ago when the project was first proposed, that I tried to get more green space and also to have some minimum green standards for the buildings. And unfortunately, it was not something that we were able to convince council to adopt at that time. I'm also super concerned about the Clear Lake expansion, where the potential for some very, very large natural gas users could go out there as part of this industrial expansion. And the pipes aren't laid there yet. So that might be a place to where council could go back and actually limit some of the large new infrastructure that might go out there. So unless there's any other comment, we'll move on. Emily, go right ahead.
I just want to say in my defense of the riverfront project, I did get a little more green space. It wasn't the green space we wanted, but got a little bit.
Next up is elections for a vice chair. Julia, do you want to speak for a moment? You've been really great as our vice chair, but unfortunately you have to leave us.
Yes, due to COVID and many other things going on, I am relocating to be more family central, and that takes me outside of the Eugene city limits. And so unfortunately, I am going to have to step off the commission. And but I've really enjoyed this role. I feel like as vice chair, what it's allowed me to do is kind of lean in to some of the other the leadership piece of it without having to take it all on. And so it's been a really good experience. I've been able to be in meetings with the city manager and the mayor. And I feel like it's a place where my voice and the people that I bring with me, you know, collectively, that I get to practice that. And it's a way for me to kind of develop my leadership in the community as well. And so I would really encourage anyone from the commission. You are all very capable, and if it's not something that you've been involved in up to this point, Zach has been really helpful. Sam is amazing, and Chelsea in helping me. This was the first time I was in this kind of position with the commission, and I feel like I really want to just encourage folks that there's some momentum going forward. You're not doing this alone, and yet what you care about and the things that you bring, it does give another place for you to put those to bring those things to the forefront. So grateful for my experience and looking forward to see who our next vice chair is.
Thanks very much, Julia. With that, do we have any nominations or volunteers?
Really quickly, can I ask Councillor Semple or Karen, is it okay if I lower your hands, or did you have something that you wanted to add?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I am lowered. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't think I still, oh, lower it. Okay, there you go.
Is there anyone that would like to make a nomination for vice chair? You are welcome to nominate yourself.
Seeing no one, is there anyone that would be willing to serve as vice chair? I know in the past, at least one or two members had expressed a possible interest. Laura, I think you had maybe expressed an interest at one point.
I would be willing if no one else wanted to, and I was also wondering if Louisa might want to.
I appreciate that. It's for me right now, it's not a question of desire, it's a question of capacity. I don't feel like in this moment, I am committed on other volunteer organizations as well as too many other things. And I don't feel like I could adequately fulfill the requirements of the position this year. I apologize.
I wouldn't mind volunteering to do it. I do have the capacity in my schedule to do it. It would be my first time, obviously, but I'm willing to learn and to put in the time and the effort into making this successful.
Well, and I don't know if I can jump in here. I would be happy to kind of help with that transition as well. And you know, like I said, this was my first time, and I feel like there's so much care and support in that it really allows you to be able to be a person that can develop your leadership in this way. So.
Well, it sounds like we have at least one or maybe two people interested in the position. Laura, do you want to have your hat in the ring as well?
No, I fully support Matima being the one.
Okay, do we have a motion to vote? How does that work, Samantha? Is it a motion on it?
So we would motion to close the nominations, and then you would vote for, there wouldn't be a motion required to vote for the commissioner. So you would motion to close, and then you would vote.
And motion to close.
Second.
Second.
I think that was Howard on the, and then so then there's a motion on the table, or there would be a motion then to, sorry, do we just vote then?
So you would vote on the motion, and then you'll vote on the vice chair.
Okay, so we need okay, so there's a motion. Okay, there's a motion to close. All in favor of a motion to close the nominations? Okay, and everyone is in favor. And next up, is there a motion to, sorry,
to vote for the vice chair?
To vote for the vice chair for Matima as vice chair.
Right, we don't need a motion for that. You could just do a straight vote. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so everybody in favor of appointing Matima Richardson as the vice chair?
Yes.
I am in favor as well. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Matima, happy to have you as on the leadership team. And
Yay, Matima.
After the meeting to discuss next steps for the next meetings, to prepare for those. Great, thank you so much.
Sorry to ruin the momentum. I just want to make sure I wasn't able to see everybody. Was that everyone was in favor, or did everyone vote? Did anyone abstain?
So I thought I had seen everybody's hand go up, except for Karen.
Did we get Karen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Just want to make sure. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Great. Moving on. Next up is our presentation on City of Eugene transportation and electric vehicles and targets for electric vehicles and how that relates to our climate action plan. So without further ado, Samantha, can you introduce our staff that are presenting?
Yes, thank you so much. I am thrilled to introduce to you all Logan Tells, who works with our Public Works Transportation Group. He does an amazing job working on our EV strategy within transportation and across the city. I'm just really starting to get to work with Logan more and more, so really excited to have him here tonight. I'll let him introduce other pieces of himself as he speaks a little bit about what's going on with EVs at the City of Eugene. With that, I will turn it over to Logan.
Thanks, Samantha. I am going to share my screen with you all and bring up my PowerPoint really quick. Let me get that sorted. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. So, hi, my name is Logan Tellis. I'm a transportation planner with the City of Eugene, working on implementation of our electric vehicle strategy. I am going to talk to you all about a few things today. To start, we're going to give a quick overview of what the electric vehicle strategy is for anyone in the audience who isn't familiar with the document. We're going to talk a bit about the work that has taken place in 2020 and work we plan on doing in the coming year. We're going to talk a bit about some key equity considerations as we move forward with implementation of the EV strategy. And then we're going to move on to talk about challenges in increasing EV adoption rates. And then finally, we're going to conclude the presentation with us taking a look at some current EV data from Lane County and the City of Eugene together. And then we'll have time for questions after the presentation. So some of you may be asking, what is the electric vehicle strategy? And in a nutshell, it is a list of 26 action items that are designed to help us reach our goal of 50% electrification by 2030 and 90% electrification by 2050. And these 26 action items are broken up across 4 broader categories. We're not going to walk through each individual action, but we're going to talk a bit about each of these categories before moving on. The first category being charging infrastructure. Naturally, we can't expect anyone to own and operate electric vehicles if they don't have access to the infrastructure necessary to charge them. So work in this category is really about increasing the availability of public charging, as well as incentivizing private landowners to install EV charging options. This includes single-family homeowners, multifamily housing developers, even affordable housing sites, commercial developers, so on and so forth. The next category is personal vehicles, fleets, and shared mobility, which is quite a bit squashed into one category. But it's really about getting individual drivers to consider switching to electric vehicles. It's about getting companies and organizations that use vehicles in their operations to switch their fleets over to EV models. And it's also about getting individuals to either replace or supplement their travel with electric shared mobility options. So something like an electric car share program, an electric bike share program, and or an electric scooter share program would all fit into that category. The next one is education and outreach. For a lot of folks, EVs are a relatively new subject, and we want to be providing good information about what electric vehicles are, how they operate. We want to make sure we're clearly communicating the environmental benefits of EVs, and we want to make sure we're clearly communicating the financial support that's in place for people interested in purchasing electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And then the final category is targets and tracking, which is really about monitoring our progress, both in terms of EV adoption and a bit about GHG modeling. So this document was developed in 2019 with our partners at LCOG, and implementation began this year. So we are still in the initial year of implementation. And with that in mind, you might be asking, what's the term of this document? And most of the actions fall within what we call the short term and the medium term, which would be within 2 years and medium term being within 5 years. There are a handful of select longer term actions identified as being beyond 5 years, but that's a fairly small number. So you may be wondering how implementation has gone so far the first year. And I'm going to walk through some key work that's taken place across each of these categories in 2020. Starting with charging infrastructure actions, one that comes to mind really prevalently is the application process that we're currently in with Electrify America. For anyone who isn't familiar, Electrify America is a charging station firm that generally focuses on DC fast charging. And what this firm is doing is they're taking money from the Volkswagen emission reporting settlement that some of you may remember from a few years ago. And they're using that funding to disperse charging infrastructure across the United States. So when they opened their third investment cycle earlier this year, the city of Eugene, in partnership with, I believe, 13 or 14 other local organizations, submitted a letter of support and data making a case for why the Eugene-Springfield metropolitan area is a strategic region for them to invest charging infrastructure in. Now, the initial application for that went out in the summer. It's an ongoing process. They have a lot of analysis to do before they make any final decisions, but we have received some encouraging follow-up communications. We had a call with them just this morning, answering some additional questions. So I'm feeling fairly encouraged about that, but we won't necessarily have a firm answer for the next several months. I'm expecting to get a bit more information probably in the spring, but once again, they haven't finalized when they're going to make the final decision. And if that is successful, the actual charging infrastructure itself wouldn't begin being deployed until January of 2022. But additionally, on the charging infrastructure front, we've started some work on identifying and prioritizing future charging sites. That's a conversation that's still underway. In the personal vehicles, fleets, and shared mobilities category, the city has its ongoing practices of purchasing electric vehicles to fill our fleet as we need new fleet vehicles. So our city staff have done a great job making sure that we purchase as many of those as we can. There's sort of an internal policy of making EVs the default. And if someone wants a gas or diesel vehicle, they have to make a pretty strong case for why an EV wouldn't be sufficient for their use. Additionally, in this category, there's been continued work on planning a future e-scooter pilot. Naturally, there are some challenges in this current environment that we're in, but we have staff working on developing administrative rules for that program. In the education and outreach category, we've recently relaunched the Rev Up workshops. Some of you may remember that Rev Up was a EV 101 education workshop series that was put on in partnership with the city and EWEB and the University of Oregon. I believe the past year or two, it hasn't taken place, and we have relaunched that workshop series this year with the help of the Emerald Valley Electric Vehicle Association. And we've relaunched that workshop series, and we had our first one last night, actually. It had fairly good attendance, and our next one will be on December 3rd. I'll take some time to chat the registration details in this meeting chat box after the presentation in case anyone's interested. But in addition to answering all the frequently asked questions that new EV buyers usually have, everyone who attended the workshop is eligible for a $1,000 discount off either a Chevy Bolt or a Nissan Leaf. So that's a fun perk that people get for attending. Additionally, in the education and outreach category, we started work on an EV community engagement plan with me and another transportation planning staff person. That's underway, and that will give us a good strategic sort of platform to start our outreach with the variety of groups that really intersect with this topic. And then the final category is targets and tracking. Some work that's taken place here is providing the state with input on current carbon emission modeling tools and how future tools may better suit the needs of cities, not just the city of Eugene, but city transportation departments like ours. We've also engaged LCOG a bit on some carbon emission modeling display tools that they've been developing. And then finally, this isn't really something the city did, but it's kind of a fun update, so I thought I'd include it. The state recently published a EV registration data dashboard that's really great for someone like me trying to keep tabs on this, but also great for community members who just find this subject interesting and want an easy way to visualize it. And we'll take a look at a screenshot of that later. So with all of that covered, you may be wondering, well, what's next? And for us, a few key things come to mind. On the charging infrastructure front, if we receive firm approval from Electrify America, there will certainly be work with them to deploy charging station units in the Eugene Springfield metropolitan area. Additionally, there's plans to install additional city-owned or city-subsidized level 2 charging stations in town. On the personal vehicles, fleets, and shared mobilities category, we plan on completing those draft administrative rules for the e-scooter pilot, and that will be helpful for moving that effort forward. Education and outreach will include the launch of an educational electric bike workshop, which we hope to model after the Rev Up electric vehicle workshop that we just discussed. And the details on that still need to be worked out. Not sure if we'll be able to provide the same, degree of discount, but it's something that's being planned for the coming year. We will complete the EV community engagement plan, and that will be a very helpful tool for us. We'll ramp up outreach to multifamily housing developers and property managers about EV charging stations and the benefits of installing EV charging stations at multifamily housing sites. And then finally, we will continue monitoring the state EV data dashboard. And that data dashboard, it's really a snapshot in time kind of data display tool. So to create a historic log, I'm currently pulling, saving, and analyzing new data as it becomes available so we can build our own historic log. But I may also be doing some outreach with the state to see if we can get something up on their website so people have more ready access to historic EV data. So we've talked a lot about EVs so far, and we haven't talked a lot about equity. So I figured this would be a good time to just walk through some of the key equity considerations that we're trying to keep in mind as we move forward with implementation of the electric vehicle strategy. And the most obvious one, the first and most obvious one that comes to mind is location, location, location. Where are the charging infrastructure units being placed? And where are the programming efforts being concentrated? And this is something to keep in mind, making sure that low-income communities, communities of color, communities with other types of vulnerable populations are receiving, infrastructure and programming attention. There's also some real interest in, well, I say there's some real interest, it's in the electric vehicle strategy to specifically conduct some affordable housing site specific work around electric mobility access. And that's something that we'll certainly be doing. Beyond location, there's also the topic of providing shared mobility options. We recognize that not everyone can afford the cost of purchasing a vehicle, whether that be new or used. And providing shared mobility options like electric car share, electric bike share, electric scooter share is something that can expand electric mobility options to low-income populations. And when we are designing those types of and offering those types of services, it's really important to keep in mind use options for unbanked community members. So for someone who doesn't have a credit card, or community members without smartphones, because we certainly know that there are folks without smartphones. Additionally, we want to make sure we're clearly communicating tax incentives and rebates. I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn how much they might qualify for when they purchase an electric vehicle at the federal level. There are circumstances where people qualify for in excess of $7,000 in tax incentives. At the state level, the baseline EV rebate is $2,500, and if you're a low-income person, which they define fairly loosely, you can stack an additional $2,500 on top of that for $5,000 of state rebate. And we have the benefit of living in Eugene, so EWEB offers rebate incentives for installing charging infrastructure at your house. So there are certainly options for people, and we want to make sure we're clearly communicating what kind of financial help they qualify for. Additionally, we want to promote more affordable electric mobility options. So if someone comes to the conclusion that purchasing an electric vehicle just isn't in the cards for them financially, that doesn't necessarily mean that an electric bike or a personal electric scooter or some other type of electric micro mobility device, there are certainly a lot out there these days, wouldn't be an option for them. So we want to make sure we're discussing electric mobility options holistically and not focusing strictly on cars. And then finally, there are probably additional equity considerations to be identified. The beauty of community engagement is that as we speak with community members, we'll learn more about their needs. And I am certainly looking forward to that and welcome that learning process. So with the equity slide covered, let's move on to some challenges in increasing EV adoption rates. As a city staff person, I'm just going to start with funding constraints. You know, this is a new work area for us. And when we started at the beginning of 2020, there wasn't necessarily an identified pot of money to get the ball rolling on this work. And over the course of the last several months, we have identified some money in the city budget for this. But you know, all the same, it's going to be a continued conversation in subsequent years. What's our funding status? Are there grant opportunities for us to further expand our efforts on this work? And that's going to be something that we need to keep in mind. We've said this we kind of covered this in the last slide, but the cost of purchasing a vehicle is also something that is really challenging for increasing the EV adoption rate. Not everyone can afford it. And there is a perception that electric vehicles are more expensive than conventional vehicles. Speaking of perception, whether it's real, whether it's perceived, there is certainly range anxiety on the part of people thinking about electric vehicles. And there is anxiety around access to charging infrastructure. So people are concerned about driving an electric vehicle, running out of charge, and not being close enough to a charging station to refuel. So that's something that certainly keeps some people from stepping into the electric vehicle market. Additionally, there's the topic of market availability and conditions. So I don't need to say this, I'm sure you all know, but not all manufacturers have an EV model. And a lot of people don't like any electric vehicle models that are currently on the market. I think as time goes on and more manufacturers build out their line of electric vehicles, we'll see this problem subside. But all the same, it's present. A great example right now is a lot of the buzz that's taking place about the future of electric pickup trucks and how we may see people who wouldn't conventionally be attracted to electric vehicles starting to consider that option. So that's both a subject of hope for the future, but also a barrier in the present. And then finally, there's the challenge of shifting perception and preferences. You know, for a lot of community members, I think there may be sort of a default mental construction of, you know, gas and diesel powered vehicles being the norm, being the default, and not really even thinking about whether EVs may be an appropriate fit for them. So I think challenging people's perceptions is something that certainly takes time, and it takes a cultural shift. So with that covered, I'm gonna start talking a bit about current EV data. And when we're talking about EV data, what we're really talking about is state data that is originally sourced at the DMV, because the DMV knows what vehicles are and aren't electric, and the DMV knows where every vehicle is registered to. So from the DMV, this data filters through various state departments. You can see on the screenshot to the right, which is the new data dashboard I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We're getting this data through the Oregon Department of Energy. And when you're looking at state data on EVs, you are generally going to see information broken down at the county level. So here in Lane County, you can see that there are 2,468 battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles combined, which when you're talking about pure volume, that ranks us as the 4th highest county in Oregon, behind Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas, which are obviously up around Portland. But when you normalize this data and talk about it in terms of EVs per 1,000 people, we drop down to number 6. We have 6.51 electric vehicles per 1,000 people, which isn't bad, but we'd certainly like to see that number increase over time. And this data display dashboard is helpful for me and for anyone who's interested. And one thing that you can do if you explore this tool is it allows you to download the underlying data, the underlying spreadsheet data. And if you do that and you pull it into Excel, you can do some more breakdown and look a little more specifically at City of Eugene data. And the last time they updated this dashboard was with August data. So this is not quite real time, but it's from relatively recently. And as of August, Eugene had 1,622 battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles registered to Eugene addresses, which makes up about 65% of the county's total registration, EV registrations. And one thing that's interesting, as you can see in the chart to the right, is that a majority of these are battery electric vehicles, about 65%, a little over 65%, opposed to plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Both are great, but it's good to see a lot of battery electric vehicles. I know a lot of people already know this, but they're a bit more, they're conventionally considered a bit more sustainable. Both are great, but it's good to see that there is a good portion of battery electric vehicles here in Eugene. And this doesn't really change how we do business, but it's also interesting to look at. This breaks down the EV registrations in Eugene by manufacturer. As you can see, Tesla, Chevrolet, and Nissan are doing quite well. They're the most popular. Toyota has quite a few, Ford has quite a few, and it kind of trickles down from there. I thought I'd include it just because I find it interesting. But as I said, the city's brand agnostic. We don't necessarily, this isn't changing how we do business at all. And then another fun and important thing to look at is EV registration by model year. Now, this isn't the same thing as sales data because obviously people move around between cities, they move around between counties, they update their vehicle registrations. But as you can see, generally speaking, EV model years, they go up with time, with obviously a big jump taking place between 2015 and 2019. Some people attribute this to the growing popularity of Tesla, if I'm being honest, particularly that 2017 to 2018 spike. That wasn't unique to Eugene. That was pretty well observed nationally. And a good portion of those, if you look in the underlying sales data that you can find on national vehicle trends during that time, a good portion of that is Tesla's growing popularity. And then the other thing that you're probably noticing is how small 2020 looks in comparison to 2019. And I want to be clear that 2020 column is only through August. So that doesn't represent up until now, and it certainly won't represent the sales that are going to take place between now and the end of the year, which we know the end of December, early January are busy for vehicle sales. But at the same time, nationally, vehicle sales are down right now as a reflection of the economic conditions we're in. I believe in Q3, national vehicle sales were down about 10%. Some types of vehicles are being impacted by that more than others. For example, I believe Q3 Nissan reported a 32% drop in sales in comparison to the previous year, whereas Tesla had had a record-setting quarter for deliveries, which they use as a proxy for sales. So it's hard to say what the final impact will be once it's all said and done and the state data dashboard is updated. But it's certainly something to keep a mind in, to keep an eye on. And there are certainly people who speculate that the decline in national vehicle sales will result in perhaps less EVs registered in comparison, certainly to 2019 and 2018. So we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out. And with all of that covered, I'm going to open up the floor for questions.
Thank you so much, Logan. I feel like I benefited that as much as our commissioners are from that. So thank you so much for that really amazing information. I am happy to get us started with questions, unless we have commissioners who are raring to go. Is there anyone currently with questions? Awesome. So I see Louisa and then Jim. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll go in that order. So I will turn this over to Louisa.
Thanks. And thanks so much, Logan. That was really helpful. One of the conversations that came up the last time we had a sort of commission discussion about this was the fact that placing EV charging at large employers like hospitals and schools end up with this untaxed benefit concern where the logical thing would be to charge your vehicle while you're at work, but then somehow that creates challenges for the employer or the employee. And especially with large regional employers that we have in Eugene, that seems like a really logical thing to do. Have there been any movement on, I don't know, how to address that concern to allow for charging at work?
So I haven't heard any specific information about tax challenge associated with workplace charging. It's possible that I just haven't come across the topic yet. I'm not saying that there's not an issue there. So we haven't really engaged large employers at this stage. Like I said, we're in the initial year of implementation, and identifying where we were going to start work was really about finding paths of least resistance within the document, and figuring out which actions we could get rolling quickly. So I would certainly. I think I would benefit from a bit more information about what you all have heard from employers about and employees about that consideration.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll see if I can dig up
Okay.
some more notes. And I had, if it's okay, Jim, I had one other question, which is, I remember celebrating when gas almost hit $5 a gallon in a really kind of masochistic way, because it pushed people to think about efficiency in their cars. And fuel is cheaper than I remember it being in years right now. And that probably is a consideration that people are looking at when they're thinking about investing in a car and how they're focusing on fuel efficiency or moving into an electric vehicle. Is there consideration in the work that you're doing or at other levels about the potential, the impact writ large of fuel prices on adoption rates?
So you're certainly right. It's certainly something that people factor into the equation. As you stated, fuel prices are quite low right now, and I think a reflection of that is that a lot of the vehicle sales that we're seeing right now are actually disproportionately trucks and SUVs. I saw one estimate that estimate that projected 75% of vehicle sales this year are going to be trucks and SUVs, and that's partially because of low fuel costs, and that's partially because of low interest rates. So we're seeing less vehicle sales overall, but people who are buying vehicles are buying more expensive vehicles, and as I said, more trucks and SUVs as a result of those factors. In terms of implementation of the electric vehicle strategy itself, which is kind of what my work is limited to, there's nothing in the document that would sort of empower me to chase something like a gas tax increase. So to be honest, I'm not quite sure if there are other working groups in the city that are addressing this more directly, but it's unfortunately not a component of the EV strategy.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Jim?
Hi, Logan. Thank you very much for the presentation. Quick question on the 50% by 2030 goal. Is that actual? Does that mean 50% of the registered vehicles in Eugene would be EVs, or is that the
That would be the
percentage
goal.
of new purchases?
I believe the goal would be registrations.
Well, that's very different. We recently had a presentation by EWEB to confirm the feasibility of electrification of cars and buildings. And the percentage rates that were mentioned in their scenario, that they had like several percentage rates, but if I understood that correctly, that was like of new vehicle purchases, that those percentages were how many were EVs. So they're not modeling anything close to the adoption rate that you're describing in this goal.
Yeah, I understand that. And to be clear, the goal that is explicitly called out in the electric vehicle strategy, it isn't a modeling number. It's not modeling the anticipated number of electric vehicles in the future. It's more of an aspirational goal. And
Oh,
it
okay.
is quite I agree
Yeah.
that it's quite aggressive. And when the city sets really aggressive goals like that, I think it's more about pushing the needle as fast and as hard as we can, rather than spending time modeling and trying to pencil out according to the math what we expect necessarily, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think that's a very good way to put it. I would just encourage you to actually make that clear, because we all hear what we want to hear, and I mean, I think a lot of us are really eager to see these really impressive numbers like 50% by 2030. But if I just penciling a little bit here on the side, I mean, that sounds like 5,000 new EVs a year or thereabouts. That's pretty aggressive. I just wondered if we, if the supply chain, like, are there that many EVs available per year in Eugene? How many people in Eugene buy a new car per year? And do you have any data on that?
No, I personally do not right in front of me. Yeah, but I hear what you're saying, and I do appreciate that comment. I think that certainly, and as we move forward with this document, I think it's good to make it clear that is an aggressive aspirational goal rather than a modeling number.
Yep. Well, I hope we make it. Thank you.
This is Chelsea. Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Jim, I really appreciate your questions, and I just want to make sure we're crystal clear. So the EV strategy was developed based on a motion passed by council, and the language that you see here around 50% and 90% are part of that motion, but that is not a formally adopted EV goal by council. That was go develop a strategy that tries to hit those marks. If you look at the CAP 2.0, we through the TSP modeling, we anticipate that includes about 5,000 EVs adopted by 2030. And then we also add an additional 15,000 EVs as part of our strategy to hit the 2030 number. So that's more what we're thinking would be possible given kind of the current, probably pre-COVID, to be honest, state of affairs. And then I do really appreciate that you brought up the EWEB report as well. As you know, EWEB put out like a first version of their report, and then they put out a revised version of their report. So the first version came out in July or August, and the revised version came out this month, I believe. And you'll notice in there that they tighten up their language around the city's goals quite a bit between the two. It's just a consequence of EWEB moving really fast to get an initial version of that report out and not having a chance to touch base with us before they made it public. And so we tried to clear up any kind of misconceptions in that second version that was put out. So the second version is really what I would look towards.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. That's helpful. For anyone who doesn't know, the EV strategy was actually developed before I joined the city. So her having that history, it's helpful for me. It's helpful for everyone. So thanks, Chelsea.
You bet.
Awesome. Doug?
Could I also jump in and just ask Logan, could you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sure.
Everyone's face. Thanks.
Doug, whenever you're ready.
All right. Jim and Chelsea have kind of covered a number of the questions I had. Kind of the one I've got left is, do we know what the EV adoption is right now?
The EV adoption right now. So the best I can give you in this moment was that last slide that included model year data. As I mentioned, the state, when they put out new information, they tend to do it in snapshot kind of form rather than providing like progress over time type data. So I do think that I'm going to reach out to them and try getting them to just populate information over time onto their website. But if they don't, the alternative is me saving this data as it becomes available and calculating over time the progress. I believe that EWEB may have been doing that longer than me. So I might email EWEB and see how far back I can get their records. But ultimately, I can't give you, at this moment, I can't give you a percentage increase over the last 5 years in terms of new EVs in Eugene.
Okay. And as far as like total EVs versus total car registrations, it's, you know, whatever those numbers are, 2,000 divided by.
Yeah, that would be good to include. I can see if I can find the total number of cars registered in Eugene.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. That was really interesting.
Yeah, I have a question and or comment about charging and trying to support that. I mean, you know, the new battery cars, most of them, you know, you're getting 250 to 300-mile range. And then if you give yourself some slack, you can go 225 miles or whatever, you know, without even thinking about it, you know, without anxiety. And I'm just, so it isn't so much that you need a charging station on every corner or something, you know. I mean, I think originally some of the vehicles had such short ranges that, you know, you're going to drive downtown, you better plug it in, you drive home, but we're not in that situation. So I was wondering, are you working with any of the neighboring jurisdictions, Lane County, other counties in the southern Willamette Valley, to try to make sure that, you know, because the issue with the car is not driving around Eugene, it's driving out to the coast, it's maybe trying to go down to Coos Bay and everything, and then now you're in trouble, you know. So what is there any coordinated effort on that? I know saw stuff there.
So they have their, so entities around the region do have their own ongoing efforts. I certainly don't want to take credit for it, but I know Lane County has some interest in pursuing EV charging at some recreational, like hiking type sites. I know that there should be some build out of charging infrastructure on the coast coming up. I've heard anecdotally that Newport, a town called Warrenson, I know that there's going to be some additional units in Bend. So it's building out, and as some of you may know, there are DC fast chargers up and down I-5. Not everyone knows where those are, but it's you can Google electric highway and find a map. So it is certainly building out. Like I said, I don't want to take credit for that, but there are a multitude of, you know, ongoing efforts across the region, and I think we're going to see, you know, not just build out here in Eugene, but build out across Lane County and across our ODOT region, and that should really support people in pursuing electric vehicles.
Right. Yeah, I have an image in the future that, I mean, and we could lobby the state to make every gas station have 2 or 3 DC chargers, and, you know, and over the years, they don't become a gas station anymore. They become an AV station. You know? And I mean, I think that's the only way that something like this is going to happen, and we need to be pushing. So hopefully the city is also pushing the state to keep on the board and try to expand that network as well. Thank you.
Zach?
Logan, thank you so much for coming to present. I got a few questions for you. I've been seeing some stuff online. I think it's from EWEB around 2 programs. One is an Electrifies program where people can sign up to get basically talked through how an EV 101. And the second is them working with car dealerships to, I guess, train staff to sell EVs. And I think they just added their second dealership. Can you speak to either of those programs?
Yes, I believe you're referencing EWEB's programs. So EWEB, I think they're partnering with Fourth on this, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's an EV-centered nonprofit out of Portland. I believe they're working with Fourth to increase the availability of EV-specific training for car salesmen. So a recurring theme that we're hearing from people is that, you know, even if they travel to a dealership that sells electric vehicle units, and not all of them keep them on the lot, but even if they find one that does, oftentimes salespeople at those locations don't necessarily have EV specific training and can't answer the, you know, sort of niche questions that a new EV buyer may have. So 2 things that EWEB is doing to help mitigate that problem is one, the Rev Up workshops that we mentioned earlier in this presentation to answer people's questions sort of in that webinar type environment. And then two, they're providing this free training to, well, I believe it's free training to cars sales staff who are interested in getting certified, and they get a certification at the end. So that's something that EWEB is doing. And then I believe the other program you mentioned was the one where EWEB has set up a team to answer to like a I don't know if call center is quite the right term, but they have people who can take your phone call and walk you through any EV questions you may have. That team is generally like initially more intended to help people with questions about charging infrastructure and its compatibility with their individual sites, so their homes, but also if like a developer had a question about like a housing property that they're working on or a commercial property that they're walking on, EWEB has dedicated staff people to talk about the specific electric infrastructure at that site and how it could intersect with charging station installation, whether there may be issues or whether it's appropriate for that site. So they have those staff people, but they also can answer more general questions about EVs if people have them. And they're also equipped to talk about to some degree about the tax incentives and state rebates associated with electric vehicles.
Thank you. A couple more questions. A number of the EV related actions in the city's climate action plan had dates for implementation of many of them had a range of 2023 to 2025. Can you comment on that at all in terms of, are those dates getting firmed up? What are the question marks as to when those will be implemented?
Well, I think the biggest question mark when you're talking about working through a large set of EV action items, the biggest thing to be determined is one, what funding will we have available to complete that work? And then two, if it requires someone beyond the city to partner on it, you got to ask yourself how energetic and enthusiastic will those entities be in partnering with us? Will it be easy recruiting partners? Will it be difficult? How hard of a sell is it going to be? So I can't remember exactly off the top of my head which EV items live in the cap as well. But one thing that I often think about in terms of thinking about the coming year, I'm thinking quite a bit about how easy or difficult it may be persuading developers to install charging stations at their site. So that's something that I'm starting to think through and how we're going to frame that conversation to increase our chances of success, what incentives we're going to offer to increase our chances of success. So I would say the main two question marks in terms of timing are funding and partnership opportunities and how those shake out in reality.
Well, I would love to get some more details in the future about what the funding challenges are, just so that we might be an advocate for funding this very, very important work. And I guess my last question relates to one of the other big barriers you mentioned, which is generally a high upfront cost for EVs. Has the city looked at anything around financing and what can be done to help lower those high upfront costs?
So to this point, the most we have done in terms of the challenge associated with purchasing an electric vehicle is that like group buy kind of model, which is associated with the Rev Up program. It's that $1,000 discount, which I know doesn't do so much in terms of purchasing an electric vehicle for a lot of people. That's the most we've done on that front. In terms of financing, there's no mention of it in the electric vehicle strategy itself. I'm not saying it's not something that we could explore in the future, but it would be a bit unique in terms of what the transportation planning team does. And I would probably need to recruit staff from not to say that we couldn't, but I would probably need to recruit staff from other departments help fill in that gap in my experience and my knowledge of how we would administratively make that work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
A quick question or comment about EV ready homes. You'd mentioned developers and trying to get them to do things. A couple of years ago, we recommended to City Council that they require all new homes and any home that had significant remodeling to be EV ready, in the sense of having a plug in the garage with 240 volt level 2 start. And kind of got punted up to the state because of building standards in the city not being able to really change some of those things. Do you know the status of that at this point?
So your comment is bringing a couple things to mind. First and foremost, an exciting thing that happened in 2017 is the state building code started requiring developments with 50 or more parking spaces to have 5% of those parking spaces be designated as EV ready, which really means they have the conduit in place to support future charging station installation. Something exciting that's happened this past year is that I have managed to get a list of all developments meeting that criteria. And that's going to help inform some of the outreach we do, because I think it'll be a little bit easier approaching that subject with property owners if they know that the conduit is already in place, because the conduit can be a real challenge and a real cost inflation for installing new charging station sites. And then secondly, your point about the residential side of that. In 2017, that was purely about 50 or more parking spaces. But I have heard, and I can't remember the exact date that this is supposed to happen, but I do know that there is going to be some EV ready type language in the building code update for residential development. And I believe that should include single family homes. That's the conversation that I've had with others working on this subject. I can, for the life of me, I can't remember exactly when it's supposed to go into effect, but I have seen that. And I do know that it is supposed to be coming in the relatively near future. And when I say relatively, in city planning terms, relatively new future can mean like a year or two from now. But I do know that that is still in play.
Okay, thank you. We've been one of the earlier pushers for that, and Governor Brown wanted that, and I know there's been some movement on that. So I'm glad to hear it's still active. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Louisa, did you still have a question?
Yeah, Art covered a lot of it, but it actually triggered another question that's coming back to the equity point, especially in multifamily or lower income housing. It might not be plug-in for a car, but an exterior plug for a scooter or an electric bicycle that's in a secure location, right? That you can lock the bike. And so I'm wondering if, in parallel to some of those new codes that you're talking about, if there's been conversations with some of the developers like St. Vincent de Paul or other folks who work in that field about sort of thinking about these micro mobility options that you've been talking about and getting their spaces ready to support that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that comment. So there has been conversation about how we can promote electric micromobility at affordable housing sites. We have talked with St. Vincent de Paul specifically in the past. And it was one of those situations, well, speaking to the issue of funding constraints, to give you an example, we did end up putting in a grant application earlier this year to try getting a electric car share program targeted at an affordable housing site or two. And that's an example where, the funding didn't come through. We put in the application, it wasn't selected. It would have been great if it was, but we're going to continue seeking funding for programs like that. And I think in terms of affordable housing sites, since they are specifically called out in the electric vehicle strategy, there is some interest in getting, vehicle chargers out there. But more importantly, I think the programming element of those sites is going to be the heaviest hit component. About getting electric micromobility programs, there's a really strong interest in that. Whether we could get get some e-bikes for a affordable housing development site or something of that nature It's just a matter of when and how we functionally get the funding to accomplish that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
If there are no other questions, I want to leave space for those, but I do have one that I want to leave you with, Logan. But I want to make sure everyone has had a chance to reach out.
Sorry, what?
Okay, so not seeing anyone else with questions. Logan, I just wanted to leave you with this question, you know, sort of a softball, if you will. What are you most excited about in your work with the EV strategy? And what is just bringing you joy and hope moving into the future? This is often a very heavy topic. People are very serious about it, but this is really fun work, and there's really awesome work being done. So yeah, what have you got?
Well, as a planner, I think the thing that often excites me most is infrastructure. So I get quite excited about building out the charging station network, because I know that, you know, I can't snap my fingers and expect people to change their behavior overnight. But I really think about it as building the infrastructure now to support the shifting market norms of the future. And, you know, with a lot of, and this is kind of stepping outside of transportation a bit, but with a lot of newer technology, like smartphones, for example, it's the kind of thing where, you know, very few people had them. And then overnight, it felt like everybody had them. And in some ways, I kind of personally hope that, you know, EVs are the same way, where someday we're just going to look up and suddenly everyone's going to have them. And I like the idea of being prepared for that and having infrastructure in place to support that shift when it happens.
Well, Logan, thank you so much for taking an hour of your time, or an hour and change of your time, on a Wednesday evening. We really appreciate you being here. I think I can speak for all of the commissioners when I say that. We appreciate you and hope you have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you all for listening.
Thanks very much for your time.
So Zach, before we move forward to the next item, can I highlight a glaring issue with the agenda?
Is it the title?
No, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
It's that I did not build in a break for you all, and this is a very long meeting. So I just wanted to flag that, that if you all would like a 5-minute break, maybe after this next item, we could work that in. What do you think of that?
Do people want a break right now, or do we just try to blaze through and get done early?
I'm okay if we just keep going, but I'm open to a break if people need that.
Not seeing a need. I think we should just continue on.
Just wanted to make sure we threw it out there.
Next on the agenda is committee proposals. I think, Laura, were you going to speak to the outreach committee proposal? Laura? We can't hear you if you're speaking. Okay.
She was having some technical issues earlier, so she might have run into some network connection issues.
Can we switch and come back to that one?
Sure. Julia, can you take over for a minute while I get myself together for the other one?
Yes.
Or just run the question and answer portion, I guess, if there's any.
Sure.
So I put in a proposal this month that we form a committee to review the commission's prior work with regard to natural gas, basically over the last few years, to try and get a group of people up to speed on basically what the conversation has been around the interrelation of natural gas and the climate action plan work, and then basically stay abreast of the franchise agreement negotiation process, such that when that proposal comes forward, we can respond to it and say it looks good, it doesn't look good, or it's okay, but we need more. Obviously, to be able to respond and to recommend potential next steps if those are necessary. With that, I would welcome any questions or comments.
Looks like anybody have a question or comment? Jim?
Thank you. I have a question about the scope of the committee. I think it would be really worthwhile if we could also look at like what fraction of our natural gas use is industrial. I think that's really unclear right now. I think that kind of came to light in the EWEB presentation. So I would, if we can, if we can make it a little broader than just kind of lobbying for prohibiting natural gas, actually identify what percentage is residential, what percentage is commercial, what percentage is industrial, and then make it a little more proactive. Like with residential, it's pretty clear that, we have options for electrification that are pretty reasonable. For industrial, it's not. I mean, we may be talking about actually losing jobs, if a particular industrial user doesn't have options for electrification. And EWEB didn't even include industrial in their electrification study. So I would be very excited about supporting the committee and be willing to serve on it if it could be a little broader than just what we did last time. So thank you.
Howard?
Yeah, the title on the agenda and the background information says proposal to create a 100% renewable energy ballot measure committee.
I apologize.
That's not what this is, correct?
This is a energy and buildings committee.
Okay.
Focused on natural gas, and if it gets into electricity at all, it will be very careful about how it does so.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, it's titled correctly.
In response to Jim's comments, just to state that information is available. We've reviewed that as part of previous natural gas committees, what percentage comes from various sources, including there's about 13 entities that make up 1/3 of Eugene's emissions, the equivalent of all of our residential emissions. And we have that list available with their emissions. And I would be happy to share that with you, and that we would review that as part of this committee, the full background of the information that we have and what we have previously submitted.
Great. Louisa.
Yeah, thanks. So in this need purpose, one of the stated goals would be to require minimum percentages of renewable gas. Are you talking about renewable natural gas? And how would this committee and its relationship to the Northwest Natural Franchise Agreement, which is already working on renewable percentages, how would that play a role? Which is because it's already in process.
My understanding, I don't think that's in this way. The commission has previously recommended that council consider a number of actions related to natural gas, including but not limited to requiring renewable gas, as well as potential limits on infrastructure. So this isn't we aren't saying that we're necessarily going to recommend anything around there. I think that our purview would be to review what's been done thus far as the commission and what information is available. Be aware of what's happening with the franchise agreement and be able to respond to it in a positive or negative manner, and potentially offer next steps for if that agreement does not achieve the reductions that we think are necessary for natural gas. We could potentially offer next steps at that point. So we are not necessarily going to the committee might come to some type of consensus about what a next steps might look like, or be able to respond to the franchise agreement if it has some but not all of these things. We can respond in real time, that will be have the information that we'll be able to do that.
Other questions or comments? Right, seeing none. Do we have a motion for this committee?
I will move. I hope there's a second.
All right, do we have a second? Howard?
I'll second.
All right, and help me, Samantha, any discussion? Further discussion?
Yeah, I think at this point, since you have a second, you can move to vote.
Okay. All in favor in this?
Yes.
All right, and Karen has a blue hand up. All right, all opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, looks like, Sam, did you get that? Okay, looks like we passed. So Sam, do we need to do anything as far as committee members at this point?
So at this point, I think we can move over to the proposal to create the Commission Outreach Strategy Committee.
All right, great. And
Do we have volunteers for that committee? I mean, I can send it out to everybody.
It looks like Jim. Yes,
I would like to
Jim.
volunteer. Okay, thank you.
And Howard. All right, we'll start with Jim and Howard. You got that, Zach?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for running that portion of
Sure, sure. Do you want to take it back over? You want me to do the outreach?
Is Laura available to present now?
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm having a little bit of issues tonight. I'm here.
I'm happy to take back over. Thank you very much, Julia. Laura, do you want to take over for a minute and talk about the outreach committee?
Yeah. Let me know if you have any trouble hearing me. So this is, we did have this committee before, so this is, for some of you, this is familiar. I changed the proposal a little bit just to include some of the new topics we talked about, like COVID-19 response. And I removed something we had, but previously we talked about moving commission meetings to other communities, but that's not really on the table right now. So this just reflects some of those changes. But other than that, it's the same committee as before. And with the goal of doing outreach, community outreach. And also this would kind of encompass the grant program. So figuring out how we would distribute the money and bring the community in to know about it. So yes, I think everyone got to read the need and purpose and the time. So it'd be starting with a 4-month time frame, at least 3 meetings. And Kelsey would actually chair this. So she's not here tonight, which is why I'm presenting on it, but she would chair this and I'm interested in being part of it as before, but I'm just presenting it for her because she couldn't be here.
Thanks, Laura. Any questions or comments? Julia?
I feel like what I would love to say as a plug for this committee is that it was the work that we had started last year was prior to coronavirus and really had to do with looking at how the Sustainability Commission could be more interactive with not only the community, but specifically look at our equity lens and where we could begin to invite all the voices of our community into these spaces. And so we had looked at last year what we had kind of started with had to do with the sponsorship option, which was creating a budget, which passed. And now we have a $5,000 a year budget from the city to include folks to come and ask for sponsorship. And that allows for commissioners to be involved in things that are happening grassroots in the community. And also the other piece of that, as Laura mentioned, was looking at how we could physically be present in other areas and not just downtown. And so I think with COVID, what it has done is it's allowed us to kind of like as everyone, we're revisiting how we hear people, how we get a collective voice of our community, and look at that equity lens. And so I think that is why I'm really excited about this committee going forward, because Zach and I recently met with the mayor and the city manager, and this is a huge concern of theirs, that folks in our community, that their voice is being heard and being brought forward, and as an advisory council to, or an advisory body to council, that we would bring that voice forward, but also that the education piece, that how these impacts are happening, how we reach communities that may not have had these conversations before. How do we begin to kind of coordinate to do that as well? So I think it's good work. I think it's foundational, and I really encourage you to think about being a part of this committee.
Art?
What more can we say? I move that we create this committee as proposed by Laura.
I second.
I will make a comment, I think, before we vote, which is just that when we presented to council last month, Julie and I, on the commission's work plan for the year, one of the items that multiple councilors mentioned as of a major concern was what outreach we are doing to marginalized communities. And so I think it's a priority for council, and I hope that as part of our work in this group that we can reach out and kind of build a model that hopefully we can begin to build relationships with some folks that maybe don't often get heard in the process, and hopefully we can create things and relationships that will last into the future. Yeah, and with that, all in favor, please raise your hand.
Yes.
Okay, and I see Karen's in the window, so that is yes from everyone. I'll say any no's and any abstentions, just for process. Okay, all right, so that was all in favor, so the motion passes.
Can we look at people who would be volunteers or be interested in being part of that?
Good idea.
I know Kelsey's chairing it, and Laura, you brought that forward.
Is anyone else interested in serving on the outreach committee?
I am interested in serving on the committee. I would not be able to commit the time until one of my other committees closes. So I would have to, we're hoping to submit an air quality report at the end of the year. And so if the committee would be willing to delay until January, I'd be happy to join.
Okay, well, we'll just let Kelsey know that, and we'll try and get that committee up and running basically as soon as you guys are able to. I think we were going to get this to during updates time, but we just got the bylaws, notes on the bylaws from the lawyer about a week and a half ago. We met yesterday to go through those and do another draft of the bylaws. So we expect that to have that back for next month's vote. And so if folks want to put on and get money for an event, before then, talk to us and we can help navigate that process. But that process is going to be set up in December. And so meeting in January to begin planning the actual outreach I think would be reasonable. So we'll let Kelsey know that it passed and to reach out to Laura and Louisa about scheduling. With that, we are moving on to commissioner and staff updates. We have a little bit of a longer update from Chelsea this month. She'll be presenting to council next month on the climate action plan and the development of a implementation plan for the climate action plan and a plan to review all of the community recommended actions that came in and the equity panel recommendations that came in. So she's going to give us a little preview of what she is going to be presenting at council next month.
You're on mute, Chelsea.
Thanks. Gotta get your Zoom bingo card filled in somehow. You're welcome. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to turn my camera off, and I have an obnoxious light in the background apparently. Sorry about that. But I'll turn it back on for Q&A. So I'm here. And let's see, Samantha, can you just confirm that you're seeing some slides?
Yes, I can confirm.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. I just wanted to share some progress on these, on the work we've been doing around these motions and hear your feedback. So without further ado, you all probably know at the July 29th work session, City Council approved the CAP 2.0, which is super exciting. And they also passed 2 other motions, which I'll refer to tonight by fancy names called Motion 1 and Motion 2. But before we move on to the approach, I just wanted to review those for you. So Motion 1 is to bring back to council the cost and timeline to complete a high-level analysis of all the community and equity panel ideas for potential action included in the CAP 2.0 in the fall, considering estimated cost per ton of emissions reductions, cost per ton of emissions reductions, co-benefits, feasibility, and equity impacts. And then Motion 2 is to bring back a process and timeline for an implementation plan in the fall, with special consideration given to the ideas brought forward by the Sustainability Commission. And I'm going to jump into the approach that I will share with council. We have a work session on December 9th with council to share our formal recommendation. But before I do that, I just want to address that in Motion 2, you see that section that says give special consideration to the ideas brought forward by the Sustainability Commission. The ideas that were brought forward were actually ideas from the community. And so those actually fit with Motion 1. And Motion 2 refers to actions within the adopted CAP 2.0. So I'll address those ideas within Motion 1. I just think during the rush of the work session, they got included in Motion 2, and that doesn't actually make much sense. So just want to make that clear that we haven't forgotten about your ideas. They're just going to be addressed in Motion 1. And with that, I'll move to this slide. So a few things before I dive in. The approach that we're taking to this work takes into consideration a few things. When we met at the work session with City Council, we heard a lot of ideas floating around, but when it really got down to it, I think council is really concerned about budget this year for pretty obvious reasons with COVID. They're concerned about staff capacity. They're concerned about the balance between implementation and vetting ideas and creating the implementation plan. So we don't want to stop implementation and just do these motions. We want to do both somehow at the same time. So I think that's all really important to keep in mind as we walk through the approach. And the other thing I'll bring up is we discussed a little bit what the term high level means. And council did not by any means vote on, this is what it means, but my general impression was, and the way that you'll see it play out here is that high level means something like we would categorize things into like a red, yellow, or green, or rate it as a 1, 2, or a 3. So I just want that to be really clear as I go through these examples so you can provide feedback as necessary. But with that, I'll just jump into the approach for Motion 1. So you'll see at the top, this is Motion 1, Phase 1. So this would be our initial kind of cut into this work. I'm hesitating a little bit because it's bedtime at my house, so I apologize as you hear screaming because it's all fun and games until bedtime, as all parents know. The first 2 bars you see up here really go together. So the idea would be we take all the equity panel recommendations and all of the ideas from community, and we'd put them or we'd sort them. So we'd say These are the actions that would be best led by the city, and these are the actions that would be best led by other partners. So other partners could mean other Eugene Climate Collaborative partners like EWEB or LTD. It could mean best led by industry or business, or it could mean state or federal government, or probably other things I'm not thinking of. The idea would be to kind of sort those into two groups and say, these are the ones that the city should really lead on. And then in addition, we would want to pull out all the actions that are already in the CAP 2.0, so identify all the overlap between actions already moving forward. And that would leave us with a group of ideas that are things that we think the city should lead on. I think a reasonable question would be, who is going to do that sorting? And throughout this, this approach, the who is going to be staff. It's not just going to be me and Samantha on the sustainability team, though. It's going to be our whole internal climate action team, which is a group of about 25 staff members from across the organization. It has heavy representation from departments who have a lot of actions in the CAP. So for example, Public Works has a lot of representation on that team, planning has representation, waste prevention, and so on. So it's a group of staff who are really deep in this work. So that team will really lead the sorting. And then they had the idea when I ran this past them that when we pull out those partner ideas, we should make sure that those ideas get to those partners. So that's pretty obvious for ECC partners, but I think there's an opportunity there to reach out to state and federal government and share those ideas as best we can. You know, we have more sway at the state level than federal, but just to make sure people are hearing from us what we're thinking. So then we move down to the third and fourth bars. And so there we would, my goal there is to, again, do another pass at sorting with the goal of getting to the top 10 ideas for city-led implementation. And so how do we go about that? Well, if you look back to the motion, there are quite a few things that are asked for in that motion and that would help us figure out what actions are best to focus on. One concern I have with dealing with so many of those, I'm going to call them dimensions, is that we end up gathering a lot of information, but it doesn't help us come to a point where we can say, these are the ones that have emerged to the top, have risen to the top. So dimensions that are mentioned in that motion, I can just flip back for a minute. You can see our cost per ton of emissions. So really we would say there, we need to measure the climate impact. We would need to measure the cost. We would also need to look at co-benefits, which could be many, many things we've seen, right? It could be other environmental impacts, it could be health, it could be economic impacts to the city, economic impacts to the community or to business. Co-benefits can mean so many things. Feasibility could also mean many things. That could be technical or political and so on. And then equity impacts. This approach really that we're suggesting is to pick the top 3 dimensions and really focus in on those. So really hone in on what's most important to our climate work. And for our first pass, let's just focus there. Excuse me. So here we would focus in on climate impacts, equity impacts, and cost. And again, at high level analysis, so we'd be looking at rating everything as a 1, 2, or a 3. Climate impacts sounds a little vague for a reason. There we would look at ideas that have a greenhouse gas emissions impact. That can be pretty objective to say we expect it to have a small, medium, or large impact. And you assign a 1, 2, or 3 there. Other ideas are really focused on climate resiliency. So we would look to that ICAT team to lead coming up with the criteria for how we would score things. Same with equity impacts, that would be another dimension. We would look to that climate team to come up with those criteria. And then last, for cost, that would be one where we just have to come up with the ranges of cost. So I'm totally making up the numbers, but it would be something like $0 to $100,000, $100,000 to $1 million, and $1 million plus. So you'd have a ranking, something like that, where you would get a 1, 2, or 3 score. We would combine all that information. Each action would get a score, and we would see what emerges to the top. And the nice thing about this approach is that, and our goal would be to make all of this really transparent. So you'd be able to see the criteria, see how things were scored. And what we would do is we would take this back to our analysis, back to you all, the Sustainability Commission and Council. So you would have the opportunity to say, I see that this this idea got ranked as number 17, but I really think it should be number 2. Here's why. And there'd be an opportunity to reorder based on information that wasn't kind of in those top 3 dimensions. We also, as we collect information through this process, we'll also make note of things that are easy to capture. For example, if an idea has a clear co-benefit around health or a clear detriment around health, we would make sure to note that. It just wouldn't be part of the scoring, so that would be additional information that we could capture along the way. If you look back at the motion, we're actually asked to come back with a timeline and a cost. So here, again, going back to what we heard from council, I propose that this approach, because it has no additional cost, I think we can fold it into the existing workload of staff. And I asked for a timeline of 12 months. And then we have phase 2, which is really when we get to the top 10 ideas, we would have a phase 2 where we would do a deep dive on those ideas, do a thorough policy analysis with the goal of bringing those back to council with enough information that they can move forward with a decision if that's what they want to do. We think the cost for phase 2, excuse me, would be up to $45,000. It could be 0 as well. It just depends on what emerges as the top 10 ideas that we vet. We would take a look at if we could address them with staff expertise or other expertise available to us. But I think a financial worst case scenario here is that 45,000, and that number comes from an estimate I got from Good Company, who said that on average it would take $3,000 to $4,500 to do a good policy analysis on each of the ideas from the community. So again, worst case scenario, but just putting that out there as a potential. So that's motion 1. And then motion 2, I'm still kind of in feedback collection mode, but meeting with the CAP 2.0 committee on Friday, we finessed this just a little bit. Motion 2 asks for this CAP 2.0 implementation plan. And here, the idea would be to kind of repackage a lot of the information that's in the CAP already so that it's more easily accessible if you wanted to know all the information about a particular action. So we would, in this repackaging, I think we just have to come up with the details, but the idea would be in one place you could find the action, the responsible party, the climate impact, again, either GHG reduction or resiliency impact or whatever makes sense for the particular action. The timeline, which is already in the CAP 2.0. So again, repackaging there. A high level TBL analysis, which is already in the, in the CAP for City of Eugene actions. We'd add high level cost information. That would be new information. And then if the budget is secured, we note where that funding is coming from. So here, really happy to hear your comments about what you were hoping to see there. I think on Friday we heard from the committee that this felt like a good level of detail to add, so, but happy to hear otherwise tonight. Again, I just want to emphasize we're trying to get information, we're trying to be really clear on the outcomes we're seeking through this process. There's so much information we could gather, but we want to make sure we're doing that in a way that leads to action to help us get to our goals. So I hope that this approach really gives council the information that they need in terms of vetting the community ideas and the equity panel recommendations so that they can take action. And then for motion 2, I hope it gives community the information that they need to understand what's going on. And last, we did ask the committee on Friday about how to honor the Sustainability Commission's work around the ideas that you all sent to council in July. And the committee on Friday, you all can speak for yourselves as well, but what I heard was that we would note that those were the actions that were suggested, but that they it didn't make sense to give them extra points or anything in the scoring. This motion 2, I would ask for 12 months to do as well. And then a new bit of information is we're working towards finishing up this plan. If we're going to do motion 1 and motion 2 together at the same time, I'm going to ask for 12 to 18 months, just given the impacts of COVID, given the impacts of on staff being pulled in different directions, a lot of other duties as assigned, a lot of staff taking time off to deal with family responsibilities. I want to be transparent with community that it's really hard to keep everything going and then add new work on top of that, and to do it with any sort of rigor. So I just want to keep expectations realistic. So I think if we're doing these both at the same time, it's going to take potentially a little bit longer, but I think we can definitely give a progress report after 12 months to let folks know where we're at. So yeah, and then I think after we're done with that, if we're doing them together, after we're done with that first 18-month chunk, we would start the phase 2 of motion 1. So with that, let me know your feedback, your questions.
Lisa.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. I really resonate with the second portion around the kind of simpler, clear community outreach communication. It felt like a really nice way, digestible for people to process the myriad of data points that you were mentioning. So I really appreciate that. And that would be where my, I guess, vote would go to put your additional energy at this time.
Not seeing anyone else. We made most of our comments last week. I guess something that you said, Chelsea, that you on the implementation plan of taking 12 months, and that this is largely for public consumption, and kind of making it easy for the public to see what's going on. I would also just think of it as an internal tool. That this could be just in terms of identifying where the holes are, in terms of, I mean, just as a first pass, what are we already doing and what are we not already doing? Color coded green and red could be very, very valuable for, I don't know if you have that internally, or if decision makers can look at that and say, oh yeah, we were doing all these things and we're not doing these things yet. And for these things we're not doing, we still need to, okay, well, these ones, we still have a question mark for funding. Anyway, so I would just think of try and make sure it's useful for you first in actually helping us implement the CAP successfully, effectively, in a timely manner. I think that's really what council wanted it for, as opposed to another education tool to let the public know where we are on things. At least that's my, anyway, I just hope that you'll develop this over the next year and use it as a tool to help you track stuff more than just another job for something we're going to present to the public.
Zach, that's a really interesting comment. And I think one worth, I don't know how much time we have left, so Samantha, please cut us off if it's time, but it's one worth diving into, because I think the bulk of the work on motion 2 as presented is about formatting and presentation to the public. If the question is what would help support staff in implementing the CAP, I would want to take that back to staff and ask them what they need. But the way this motion came about, that wasn't really, I'm not sure that this is what staff need to do their work, I guess is what I would say. I think we should ask staff. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I would just think that council saying we want you to have an implementation plan means that they want you to be successful at implementing things, and that was what they were speaking to more than we need one more educational tool for the public to know where things are at. I don't think that was their intention. So, and I'd be happy to follow up afterward if that's.
Happy to talk more. I just think that there's a gap there between, if that's the real intent is just for internal use. I think there's a gap there. For me, I see this as a tool really to help public track and follow along. And I also see potentially some value for the work you're all doing, particularly around cost and budget identified. Staff know that already, like, is my project funded or not, or is their funding in jeopardy? Staff know that because that's their that's what they do every day. But to get that honed in a little bit better and presented in a way that's digestible for the public, I think that could be really helpful for folks who are advocating for this work to see, like, you know, this is where this action's at. Its funding was looking good, but with COVID, it's not anymore. So we need to advocate for that. Or this is great, good to go. We should just be looking for implementation. It's got funding. That's where I see the value to the public.
Yeah, I just final on this, and then Jim can speak. You know, just as an advocate or as a decision maker, I would think being able to very easily see what the holdup is with any individual policy, to say, okay, well, this is stuck behind a funding question, or this is stuck behind something else. It's to help make the decision making easier, to help identify where the hangups are. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Yeah, just to respond to that quickly, remember that the CAP was designed to include only actions that we intended on doing. Like, we didn't ask for people to submit their aspirational goals. It was only things that were intended to move forward. So I think it's a different model, and we'll have to keep playing with what makes sense internally, as well as what tools folks in the public need. So yeah, appreciate your comments, Zach.
Jim?
Yeah, I'm first of all, Chelsea, I'm really impressed with the process. I think it's very clear. You've taken a very complicated thing and made it quite clear. I was just a little unclear about, on December 9th at the presentation to City Council, are you going to be asking for a motion to proceed with, are you going to ask them to, like, prioritize between motion 1 stuff and motion 2 stuff, or to confirm the plan, or what are you going to be asking for on December 9th?
Yeah, the way that this works, from my perspective with council, is I'm presenting information that they requested, and I'm not requesting anything back. So if they want to ask me to do any of this work, then they can certainly create motions. And honestly, I'm kind of expecting that to happen. But in terms of like what I ask for, it's kind of funky, but it's not really my role to ask for anything. And I'll just kind of follow their lead on what information, what they need. I think that this work is really interesting in that I talked about this a lot with the committee. It brings up this conundrum about how do we balance planning versus implementation. So we're taking time around the margins to do this extra planning, and we're stretching it out. So hopefully we don't delay any implementation. But I could see a world in which council says, you know what, I just want you to focus on implementation and use all that time around the margins to do whatever else you can to get implementation moving forward. And I'd be like, okay, let's do that. I can also see council seeing value in all of this work, and that makes sense to me too. And we'll go that route. So we'll just see what they where they want to push. It's all everything's time and money, right? We got to figure out how to balance all that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or? I'm not seeing any. Chelsea, thank you very much for your time and the information. And we will move on to commissioner and staff updates. Are there any updates from commissioners and or from committees? If you're a committee chair, if you can maybe just mention where you are or when you expect work products to come back to the full commission, so we can schedule some time for that. Louisa?
Sure. The Air Quality Committee met on Monday, and we are reviewing the research that we've been pulling together this round, as well as some of the previous year's work, and hope to bring that report to this body at the next meeting in December, if we can pull it off. Anything else from other commissioners on our committee meeting?
Laura?
This is for the next update. So sorry, I raised my hand a little soon. I don't want to cut off Louisa if there's anything else.
I didn't see any other hands raised. I think you're up.
Okay, so I just had an update on the funding committee. We've met twice, I believe, and we're creating a document to share with the committee just of our research, and we're moving to kind of a proposal of an idea that we think could be a valuable way to move forward to increase funding opportunities for this work. And then the other committee was the Fossil Fuel Risk Bond Committee. We had our first reconvene meeting last week, I believe, and we're going to be trying to organize a presentation for kind of a wider group. And so we'll be bringing that to you more fleshed out with the intent and what it would be in possibly by our next meeting. I'm not sure, I need to check our timeline, but it should be coming soonish. If anyone else from those committees wants to add anything, please do.
And then I guess to wrap up, the bylaws committee, or the bylaws committee met, and we'll be finalizing that before the next meeting, so that we can vote so we can approve budget requests. And then as long as a couple other random updates the lawyer decided we needed to make to our bylaws at this time that had we didn't ask about, but we apparently need to change. And then the CAP oversight committee met. We basically got the presentation we just received from Chelsea a little bit longer, got to ask a lot of questions. We'll be trying to wrap up the dashboard, hopefully in December or early January, and then go moving into supporting outreach work, outreach and education work the city is doing on the CAP once we finish the dashboard. So that's everything on those. Are there any other commissioner updates? And then we'll move into if there are any other staff or council updates. Okay. Not seeing any other commissioners. Staff, did you have any other updates beyond the presentation?
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to remind you all of the upcoming belonging training that our Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement office staff will be providing. The first training will be tomorrow evening at 5:30 p.m. The next training will be Thursday, December 3rd at 5:30 p.m. over Zoom. And I am happy to resend that link if folks would like to look at the registration link. This is a training specific for boards and commissions. It's a training that staff throughout the city have been taking for a few months now. The leadership is pushing heavily for folks to take this because of the nature of the content. I've taken it. It's an amazing training. I got a lot from it. Happy to answer any questions you might have. But again, just wanted to remind you, the first meeting is tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. and the next is December 3rd. It's the same training both evenings.
Thanks, Samantha. Please do. Can you send that in the follow-up email to this meeting, just out to everyone, so we all have it again? Okay, thanks very much. And with that, Councilor Semple, if you want to tell us about some things, and that'll close us out, and we'll finish up.
Thank you very much. And I'm very impressed with this meeting. We're an hour ahead of schedule, and the second and third week of the months are always crazy, and Sustainability Commission is the end, the culmination of my crazy time. So I'm really tired. I'm glad for this hour. We talked a lot already about the Northwest Natural Franchise Agreement and the caps. So I don't really have anything else to add to that. On Monday, we're going to have a virtual tour of the riverfront, which we haven't heard anything about in a while. So that sounds like could be interesting, maybe even fun. Other things we've been talking about is resiliency for the wastewater treatment plant. And they have some really good plans to get things moving along quite rapidly. The first week's a little, right into the river, but they've really got good plans to keep things safe and safe. We had an update on the ad hoc committee on police policy. It's a big group. A lot of people haven't met in Zoom or sort of Robert's Rules meetings. So and there's a lot of topics and a lot of opinions. So they're going to have another 3 months to do that. We had the review the report from the Civilian Review Board as well as the police auditor. The office is closed because of COVID, and there has not been any decrease in asks for help. We had a list of all the complaints, and most of them were fairly minor, you know, but there were some officers who were getting the repeats and repeats, so they're looked at a little differently. We had a public hearing for the Urban Renewal District, increasing the money allowed to spend on farmers market. Quite a while ago, 2016, right before I started, council put limits on how much urban renewal money would go to 4 different projects. And with time and things increasing, it needs more money. So there is a public hearing about that. And we're going to have a work session, I think next week, and either action then or in December. And today we had a report from Judge Gill from Muni Court. And of course, everyone's affected by COVID. They've had to close court down, do a lot of it virtually. Community court was held out in park blocks back when the sun was still shining. So that was kind of cool. They've had to experiment with some things that have been successful. And when we get back together, they might still have community court outside. Just working really hard. Things are going pretty well. And then we had an executive session about real estate, and that's where we're at.
Thank you very much, Councillor Semple. For next month, we're going to be having transportation staff presenting again. Next month, it will be on bike and transportation work and planning and targets. So sort of the other half of the transportation coin, so to speak. If anybody has any questions that they want us to get to the transportation staff about bike ped work, or how that relates to the climate action plan ahead of time, please send those our way and we will get them to the staff presenter. And unless anybody has any final comments, I think we're all set. And thanks for your time.
I once again just wanted to say congratulations, Fatima, and looking forward to your involvement as vice chair. That's awesome.
And Julia, thank you for all of your amazing work.
Yeah, thank you.
Julia,
Thank you, Julia.
Is this it, Julia? I thought you were already gone.
Yeah. Possibly December, we'll see. But yes, thank you. And it's just been a pleasure to be with all of you. And I'm so grateful that we have a community of people that care like you do.
Good. Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Night.